I'm here today with Waslat Hasrat Nazimi, the author of the wonderfully titled Rausländer, Unser Koffer sind gepackt, Our Bags Are Packed, about racism in Germany and the fact that migrants are considering leaving the country after an unparalleled rise in xenophobia and a move towards the far right. So welcome. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
And I wonder, you came today with a bag. You know, the title, is it a metaphor, or do you know people who are actually leaving? Do you think this is a real risk for Germany at the moment?
Both. It is a metaphor because obviously not all of our bags are packed. My bags personally, even though I came with a bag today, my bags personally are not packed. But I think it's a feeling of having our bags packed because we feel like there might come a time in the recent months, years, who knows, where we would have to leave Germany. And I do know a lot of people who have left Germany. I spoke for my book. I did a lot of research. I spoke with many people, some people who have already left Germany, who said that they could not take it any longer because the amount of racism and xenophobia they would experience was just too much, especially if they had children. People who had children, they were much more sensitive towards it because obviously you want to protect your children, right? And you want to protect them from racism, from threats, from racist attacks, and so on.
Or just discrimination more widely, right?
Yes.
So your book draws on a lot of different studies. It's, as you said, very researched about how at different stages in life, at every stage in life, actually, migrants, people with a migrant background face discrimination. I was wondering, do you think that we'll come to that later, but do you think there was like a tipping point for you when you thought, okay, this is really getting scary, dangerous for people like myself, like yourself? And yeah, was there a tipping point?
I think the moment everything started for me and I started to politicize myself was 9/11, obviously. I was still a student. I was still in school. And so I couldn't really understand what was happening. I just knew that there was a change. For me personally, because I'm Afghan, I realized, oh, now everybody knows where Afghanistan is because before nobody knew. Nobody even cared about my home country. And suddenly it became a thing. Suddenly I experienced a lot of discrimination and racism when it came to things like my religion or people asking me, is Bin Laden your uncle, blah, blah, blah. And things like that. I think
kids are cruel.
Many Muslim kids experience this.
Yes.
So it's a...
But I meant actually like when you decided to write this book.
Yes. So the reason I decided to write this book was obviously the months before the election happened. And I started sensing that something was changing. AfD got into power in several states, in German states. And then also, of course, the way we as a media covered the Israel-Palestine conflict.
And yeah, not just the conflict, but I guess also its effects in Germany as well, right?
Obviously, yes, because we had speeches by Robert Habeck, for example, where he was celebrated for saying things like Muslims should now take a stand against anti-Semitism, otherwise they would lose their protection status, which was, for me, incredible. I couldn't believe that he had actually said that, and nobody seemed to have noticed, which was appalling to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that they didn't notice. He was actually widely applauded for that speech.
Yes.
So I actually fully agree with you that I think that was, for me, a tipping point where I was like, hang on, this guy is supposed to be the great liberal hope of Germany in a sense. You know, a few years ago, and that's how people talked about him as maybe a future chancellor. That was written up in The Guardian, all of this stuff. And he made such a racist speech, and like, we're just assuming that Muslims, which is like 1 billion people across the planet, would, support Hamas I just found it shocking. And he actually won a prize for that speech.
So. Yeah, he did. So, yeah, I think that was one of the reasons. Then I felt like I have to do something. And it was more like an outlet for me to be able to express my feelings, to be able to to write about what I was experiencing. And then I realized that a lot of people were experiencing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just not happening in the public debates.
And why is that? I mean, what's the response been to your book? Do you meet a lot of people who say, oh, come on, it's not that bad? Or is it more like, oh, yeah, it's the AFD's fault? Whereas actually a lot of your book is just talking about the systemic racism people face.
It depends on who I speak with, but if it's people who are not affected by racism, obviously they ask me questions like, oh, but is it really that bad? Are you sure? And that's why I chose to do so much research and to focus my writing on studies and research and science, because I felt like if I don't, then people will just say, yeah, it's just your personal experience, because that's what always happens. They negate it and then they make it look like it's your personal problem, which is not true. It's the system that we live in. But obviously, if I spoke to people who are also affected, many would tell me, it's great that you spoke about this because we all feel like this. When we are together, our families, our communities, we speak about leaving Germany. Where should we go? We don't have a concrete plan yet, but we speak about it all the time.
That must be really hard for people who've invested so much into building a life here, because it's not easy, right? You have to learn a lot about the German way of doing things, the language, which isn't easy, the bureaucracy and the cultural stuff as well. It must be tough.
I think because it's so tough, it's so disappointing to not see your work, your hard work rewarded. I think that's why it makes it so tough. Because I remember when I came to Germany, my parents told me, you just have to work hard, please. I mean, they didn't care so much about school, but you should focus on your community. You should be a role model, things like that. And that's what I tried to do. And then someday I realized it still didn't make me German enough. And so I think a few years ago, I stopped calling myself German. So if people asked me, I never said I was German or I'm from this city or I'm from that city. I would always just say I'm Afghan. Before maybe I would have said I'm German Afghan, but now I just call myself Afghan because at the end of the day, that's who I am and that's who I always will be.
Well, I mean, you say that, but you've been here since you were like 5 or so, right?
Yes.
So do you really think that you're not German in that sense? Or is it just you mean you will never be accepted as German because of the way you look and your heritage?
Yes, I am. I will not be accepted as German because of my background, because of my heritage. But now I also realize I don't want to be German. I do see myself as part of German society, though. I do think that I'm part of this society. I'm a part of Germany. I'm one of those people that live in Germany and who do something that contributes to German society. But I don't want to be German anymore because I have been so disillusioned and discouraged by what's been happening in the past years that I feel like, why should I be German? I mean, I'm Afghan. I'm proud of it. I have a culture. I have my ancestors who are from Afghanistan. We have values that we stand by. And if we make a promise, we stand by our promise, even if we have to die for it. So I'm very proud of that. And I want to keep that.
That's super interesting. And I wonder if there were any kind of moments of personal disillusion where because it sounds like this is a big personal journey you've been on, right? I mean, I would say things are going quite well for you in Germany. Like you've written 2 books, you're the head of the Afghanistan service at Deutsche Welle. So I wonder, was there some kind of anything that happened personally or just the kind of political and social climate changing?
I think the political and social climate did affect me a lot. Also, seeing how in 2001, when the Taliban takeover happened in Afghanistan, seeing how Germany reacted towards it and how Germany just suddenly didn't care anymore. I mean, for 20 years, they were engaged in Afghanistan. They sent their soldiers to Afghanistan. They pretended to have worked so much in Afghanistan, to have, I don't know, promoted the civil society, women's rights, human rights, blah, 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 things like that. And then next day, everything was gone. Nobody cared. And then they said the stuff like, even the then German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said, well, it's the Afghans. It's what they want. We have underestimated that maybe they don't want democracy. Maybe it's not in their culture, and racist stuff like that.
Oh, really?
It was so discouraging to see that and to realize that nobody had actually cared about this country. Nobody cared about human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. It was just for their own interests. And that's what I wrote in my first book. And I have tried to, try to really to find a way to deal with it, to deal with all the feelings that I had, with all the trauma, because it was hard for us as journalists as well, because we were a part of this whole project, right? We were also trying to, because we believed in it. I did believe in it. In
Afghan democracy.
Sure. And helping them to have human rights and to have women's rights. And then realizing that it was all just a show was really hard.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very tough geopolitical situation. And, you mentioned women's rights. This was in the era of so-called feminist foreign policy, right? Which was a project of the Greens, and particularly Annalena Baerbock, who's now heading to New York with the UN General Assembly, possibly. Do you think that this kind of idea of feminist foreign policy more widely was a bit of a sham, or it was well-intentioned but just not carried through?
I think the way they carried it through was wrong, and it was done in a very bad way. But I do believe that there was this thought that they would have a form of intersectional feminism, which was never carried out, because at the end of the day, it wasn't people of color, women of color who were doing it, but white women. And we know, I mean, look at Afghanistan. In 2001, during the Bush administration, it was feminists, white feminists, who tried who shook hands with people from the industrial military complex in the States to have the war in Afghanistan, to send bombs to Afghanistan, right? And they had Afghan feminist groups at their side in the beginning, but as soon as the Afghan feminists realized that, oh, it's about sending bombs, it's about killing people, it's about war, it's about arms, they were like, we don't want to be a part of this, and they were just sidelined. So this is how it all began, and I think there was a chance to make it right, which didn't happen, because at the end of the day, it was again about arms and military.
And what about, you've spoken before about Israel, Palestine, Gaza. Do you think that there's a similar trend there, where what kind of white German feminist organizations have been embarrassed a little bit, or they've just haven't taken the side of women? This is an issue I've reported on with the Center of Feminist Foreign Policy in particular, but it's a more of a wider problem as well.
Yeah, I think they were silent for both sides. I mean, even after October 7th, many feminist groups didn't speak out about the sexual violence that happened on October 7th. It took them weeks, or I think months, a long time. And then when it came to how women were suffering in Gaza, nothing happened. So for a year or so, we didn't hear anything about it. Which again is extremely discouraging and saddening and is disappointing. I mean,
yeah, what's the point of a feminist organization if you can't talk about women and children getting killed, right?
Exactly, yes.
So I've noticed something, and I also saw in your book that, one of the solutions you have, and I do want to talk more about that later, is kind of, strengthen civil society, NGOs, anti-discrimination and stuff. But one thing I've noticed in Germany is that even these anti-racist NGOs are just all white people, right? And so to me, it seems like the exclusion that happens of people of color, particularly Muslims, happens at every level. And so I don't actually think civil society here has a way out of it.
And the other problem is financing, because most of them are financed by the state. So they're extremely dependent on the state, which creates a huge dilemma, right?
Especially for politically controversial issues like Palestine.
Exactly. If it wouldn't make a difference, then I think it would be fine. It's fine to also finance NGOs if they were still free to speak about the issues that they care about. But that's not the case. So I have spoken to so many people from NGOs, activists, and so on, civil society members, who said, yeah, but we can't speak about Palestine. We can't just do it because we will lose our money, and we don't have money anyway. They always, every year at the end of the year, they have to fear for the next year and so on, because they're project-based, yearly project-based, which is also an issue. And then, like you said, there are so many white people sitting there as well. And it's exhausting for people of color and Black people to deal with it all the time. So that's why many people, they just opt out. They're like, I can't do this anymore. It affects them also. It affects their health as well, which is very sad.
Yeah, this is exactly what I reported on with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, because they had a lot of POC women of color, mostly employees, and the leadership was very refused to basically talk about Palestine. And they were like, come on, guys, we need to talk about it. And eventually they all burnt out and were fired or quit or whatever. So, and anyway.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference, because I know from experience that sometimes it's hard to speak about the issues that you care about, right? That's one thing. And to maybe also have to encourage people you work with to not do it as well. It's also one thing. But the other thing is to make people suffer to an extent that it affects their health. I think that's really, there's a difference in that as well. Yeah.
Is that something that's just happening in the NGO sector, or do you think that's something more widely in German society at the moment, the last couple of years, or going back even longer?
When it comes to Israel and Palestine, or any issues?
Just, people of color feeling exhausted.
Oh, I think that's been happening for a while, yes. We saw after the murder of George Floyd, we saw that there was a momentum happening in Germany. Suddenly, everyone cared. Suddenly, everyone had these do you remember these black boxes on their social media?
Oh, yeah.
Pretending to care about what was happening. But at the same time, it was like they could feel good about themselves because it wasn't about Germany. It was about some place far away.
And there's no anti-black police violence here, right?
Of course not.
Yeah. But I wonder if it's something kind of cyclical, because before Black Lives Matter, I think actually just around the time before I even moved here, there was, of course, the so-called Willkommenskultur, right? The welcoming culture towards refugees, where Germany was seen as like one of the few countries that actually welcomed Syrians, Afghans, other people from other countries, with Merkel saying, famously, wir schaffen das, we'll manage that. What happened there?
I think when we look at German history, like you said, it's cyclical. There's always a phase where people are more open towards migrants, towards refugees. And then after that, you have restrictions, asylum restrictions
like
in general. Like a backlash. And then because of the backlash, you see asylum restrictions. Like in the 90s, when my family and I came, quickly after that, 93, they had the first asylum restrictions.
The so-called Asylkompromiss, right?
Exactly.
Where people from across parties came together to decide something that required, I think, a 2/3 majority in the Bundestag. And but what were the restrictions brought in then?
It made it extremely hard for asylum seekers to gain asylum. Before, it was a little bit easier. And I think I sometimes wonder, why is that? And I think that German politics and German politicians, they tend to be maybe scared or impressed by the right. And the louder the right are, they go out on the streets, they try to protest. I don't know, there is violence, right-wing violence. It does affect politicians, and then they make these decisions. And I wonder why, because if I were a politician, I wouldn't be impressed by that. I would stand by what I believe in.
Yeah, maybe they're scared, actually. I mean, in some cases, they've even been murders of politicians. Walter Lübcke, the NSU complex of refugees, killing refugees, Hanau. I don't know. I wonder, we've actually seen with this government, they're bringing in new asylum controls. Actually, there were some laws changed yesterday, I believe. Do you think this is going to stop the rise of the right? Is that what happens in the cycle of German politics, that when you make things tougher, the right wing get quieter?
Usually it ebbs down after that, but I don't think this will happen this time. That's not my feeling. My sentiment is that we see a rise in right-wing politicians, right-wing politics, and I think we are going that way. It's what we see. It's a trend that we see in the whole of Europe. It's what we see in the States. And I think there's still more to come. I don't think that it's done yet.
What's different this time? Is it the rise of the AfD?
It is the rise of the AfD and how much they have normalized right-wing speech, especially. It's become so normal to speak about. Now we speak about migrants. Before we would speak about refugees. Now everyone just says migrants. And then migrants are like this huge crowd of nameless and faceless people who are just a bunch of criminals. And yeah, I think this is really what's worrying me, because at the same time, yes, people who are affected are affected. And at the same time, we also have to look at that. And I'm not saying that this will happen 1 + 1 and this will happen. But of course, extremists and Islamists, they love this, right? It's the perfect, in German we say Nährboden. I don't know how you call it in English, nourishing ground.
Yeah, let's go with that.
For them, because that's what they've been saying forever. They've been saying forever that, hey, Muslims, you will never be accepted in Europe. You will never be accepted in Germany. They are not one of us. You are different and you should behave differently and act differently.
That's so interesting. So you think that this kind of exclusion will actually, where everyone is painted as an Islamist, so-called Islamist, or Islamic extremist by the far right, that's actually going to drive people to the Islamists?
That's not what I think. There are actually studies that prove that it does play a role. Anti-Muslim racism does play a role in Islamophobia, in people leaning towards Islamism, because they're disenfranchised and they feel like it doesn't matter what I do. At the end of the day, I will always be the uncivilized, scary Muslim man, right? So then why not act like it?
Yeah. It seems to be a real obsession in the media as well, right? Like talking about knife crime and migrants and first names. What do you say? You know, you're a journalist. I'm sure you go to conferences and stuff where you see journalists more from the right wing, from Welt or Bild or whatever. What would you say to them if they said, well, migrants are statistically more likely to be a criminal?
I would say it's wrong. And
Okay.
the problem is that the statistics are presented in a way that it's extremely hard, even for journalists, to see what the actual facts are. I don't know if they do it on purpose. I can only assume.
The police, you mean, when they publish
the police statistics. Every year they publish them and they're so complicated. You can't really read them. And then what you also have, like we saw a few days ago, that there was a rise in politically motivated crime. And then it's not easy to find out how much of it is actually right-wing crime, because you have these categories. You have racist, you have fremdenfeindlich, you have ausländerfeindlich, where you think, isn't it the same thing? It should be the same thing, right?
It definitely sounds like the same thing to me.
But it's categorized as different categories. Why? There are many politicians and many from civil rights groups who say that it should be one group,
Right.
because then the picture would be much more clearer. Because if you just look at if you combine all these categories, then you would have then 65% of those politically motivated crimes were actually right-wing crime. And the number would be much more higher. It's still high. Even right now, if you just look at rechtsextreme Kriminalität, it's still very high. And then you wonder, why does nobody care about it? Why do we not have five-point plans in the news or in the Bundestag. Why do politicians not really care about it? I ask that myself all the time.
That's a really good point. Do you think it's because it's uncomfortable for Germans to admit that, like, actually they didn't master their past and that there are still a lot of right-wing extremists here? Because most of these crimes are just people drawing swastikas at some point, right? Like,
Yes.
Not most, but like a lot of them, or, saying something in a chat group, often police saying it in a chat group, or doing the Hitler salute or something like that, more than violent crimes. But of course, there are those as well.
Obviously, of course. I do think that Germans do have a problem with accepting that maybe Deutschland is not entnazifiziert, because whenever I say it, people gasp. They're like, "Oh, how can you say that? It's not true. We are how do you call it in English? I have no idea. Entnazifiziert."
Denazification.
Denazification. Perfect.
Never happened. Yeah. So I wonder, do they still say that even with the AfD at 25%?
They do. They
Okay.
do, because they do see these things as separate things, which I think is the main issue.
Well, it's so there's the discrimination on a structural level, and there's far-right extremism. And in German minds, there's as I understand, you're saying that the two are completely separate, right? But actually, are they separate?
No, they're not. It's the same thing. It's just that it has transformed into a new thing, which is the AfD today. And I don't think that people realize this. I think they think that it's completely different because we don't have a Hitler who they can hate and project everything on. Because German society loves to pretend that it was just, I don't know, 2-3 people who were the Nazis.
Yeah, the Nazis. I find it always interesting that, like, the phraseology they use, which is, oh, the Nazis did this. Who were the Nazis?
Yeah.
It was the Germans, right?
Yes.
And this is something that Polish people always point out. Like, it's almost calling it the Nazis is almost an excuse.
Exactly, yeah, because obviously it was their forefathers who were the Nazis. And I don't think they have actually come to terms with it.
Yeah, I mean, it must be hard to come to terms with. I understand that, but I do wonder if this approach of just admitting we were bad, but now we're better, if that's actually realistic. Because as you point out in your book, Germany's not just, a flawed country like every other. When it comes to anti-Muslim racism, anti-Black racism in particular, it's one of the worst in Europe,
It's their second, yeah.
Yeah, after Austria.
After Austria.
Which is where, the man himself came from. So
Yes.
I think, is there a level of denial about this systematic racism as well as the right-wing extremism?
I think so, yes. And also there is this, they also don't want to look at it from a scientific perspective. They still portray it as if it was personal experiences, even though there's so much research. I mean, just look at the research. If you do not believe us, just look at the research and you will see that we live in a racist system. We live in a racist system, and everyone is socialized with those racist theories, ideas, whatever, right? I am socialized with it, you are. So why can't you just come to terms with it? I think the most important thing is to be self-reflective and to realize that, yes, I can also be racist at times. So my goal should be to work against it or to work towards a more anti-racist future. And this is sometimes very frustrating.
Okay, so racism, is it just when people shout, Ausländer raus at a party or at someone on the street? Or what ways does it affect people?
It affects them in every way because it starts at the very beginning. I mean, there is research that shows that it begins in the kita. So in kindergarten already, children do experience racism. They experience being treated differently. I already have had conversations with my children about skin color. I had conversations with the people who work in the kindergarten, explaining to them that white pencils are not Hautfarbe. So things like that. I already have to have these conversations. I already have to explain my children and buy books for them, explain to them what racism is. So my children, they are young, they're below 6, and they already know when I tell them, or I have to talk to them about things that are racist. And they already know the words, they already know the theories, they know everything, because I want them to be educated and informed. Because once it happens to them, they should be able to contextualize and to say, okay, this is happening right now, and this is the reason. Because yes, my parents were much more open, maybe, compared to others, and they did call it out. But I also, maybe because there was not the space there to speak about the racist experiences that I had, because obviously my parents were so much busy. They were so busy with surviving in Germany and building a future for themselves that obviously there was no space for me to be like, hey, I experienced racism in school today.
Yeah. I mean, so you came here in the mid-90s, early 90s, and that was a time where Germany had just gone through this massive shift of reunification. And I wonder, you know, a lot of people were worried about a rise of nationalism then. In the East, in particular, it was infamous for neo-Nazis, right? But you grew up in West Germany.
Yes.
You said there was racism there. What kind?
The normal kind. Things like being called Ausländer, experiencing discrimination, being treated differently. In school, I would be treated very differently from the other students. I would experience comments on my looks and stuff like that, and not getting good grades, even though I did good. Not getting the.
But surely the grades are about, you know, how many questions you answer correctly.
No, obviously not. And there are studies that prove that even if you have the same answers, people, and the one study that I read, they were looking at a Turkish child or Turkish origin child and a German child, and they saw that they had the same answers, and the Turkish origin child got a worse grade than the German child. So why is that? Obviously, it's because of racism, right?
Sure. And I wonder because, you know, I was really shocked, to be honest, when I found out about the way that they choose, like the schooling system here, right? So for those who don't know, in Germany, you get a letter of recommendation to say which school you should go to. And it's not based on anything kind of objective. It's just on the vibes which the teacher has. And for me, it was shocking because in England, we had a system that was way more objective than that. But we still got rid of it in the 1970s.
Wow.
Because we thought there's a room for systemic discrimination in here, not based on race as much as class, right? So the idea we had this system called the grammar schools where people who did better in school got to go to a better school. And we thought, no, because then rich parents can game the system. It's unfair. And if we want to have like, social equality, then we need to, you know, give good education to everyone. Of course, it didn't work out fully, and there's been some backlash against it because then rich parents can just move to nicer areas, right? But I wonder, why do they think that, despite knowing for a fact that there's so many teachers have racial prejudices, seeing these studies, why is it still about the teacher's decision and not about, if you do want to have this multi-tiered, this stream system, we call it, why is it about the teacher's decision and not about just, you know, a test, how well you do in a test?
I think it is to uphold a classist system. It's classist and racist system, because at the end of the day, it's not just migrant children who suffer from it, but also children, and we know this also from studies. Also children who have a non-academic background, right? They're
working class.
Working class, yes. And I experienced it myself. So there are so many examples. I think every migrant child has experienced this. I didn't get the recommendation for the gymnasium, and I was just lucky because my parents, they insisted on sending me to the gymnasium. My grades were good, but they were like, we feel like she would fit in more maybe in the Realschule. And I also saw that I had neighbors whose children, they voluntarily decided to go to the Hauptschule and not to the Realschule, even though they could have gone to the Realschule, because they were like, yeah, but this is what my parents already did and my grandparents, and this is where we see us, people like us. So they were voluntarily doing it.
So there's actually an element of sticking within your lane, right?
Exactly.
Voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
Is that a lack of confidence, or it's a question of identity, or?
I think both, because in Germany you have the society there's so much divide in the society.
Yeah.
You have people who expect you to stay, like you said, stay in your lane, to stay in your community, to stay in your kiez or whatever. And it's very hard to get out of it. I've been trying, and this is what I experienced, because now I have reached a point as a migrant in Germany where I should be able to level up. And I realize I can't. Like, I'm looking for an apartment since 3 years, and I'm trying to find a nice apartment for me and my family.
Wow.
But it's so hard. And it was way easier when I was a single person who was trying to find a normal apartment.
Yeah.
It was easier because then they saw that my income is good.
Yeah.
I have a stable income, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And now I realize that there are certain spaces where I'm not welcomed. And this, again, makes you realize that you will always be different.
That's so interesting. I mean, and you think that it's this point where people are having families where it starts to hit home that ultimately you're not kind of going to fit in ever, right?
Absolutely. Realizing that your children will make the same experiences that you did. It's extremely frustrating.
I guess you can actually really compare this with yourself, right? As someone who came here, do you think things have got better in a certain way, that there's less openly racist speech or bullying or whatever, or maybe it was better for a while and then it got worse again?
I think it's hard to say, but I just thought that we would be way more progressed by now. I felt like when I was younger, I felt like, okay, my children will not experience this. We will be way more progressed. We will be able to live in a more progressive society. But we still are not. We still are having the same debates. We're still having the same conversations, and we still have to fight for ourselves being seen, right? And I thought that would be different. And I do think that the expectations have also changed, because I can imagine my family's not from the Gastarbeiter, so-called Gastarbeiterbewegung. But I can imagine that the ones who came to Germany from Anatolia, Kurdish people, Turkish people, I can imagine that they didn't have the same expectations. They probably just wanted to earn good money, send it to their families, and that's it. But now the second, third, fourth generation, obviously they don't want to deal with these things. They want to be seen as German, and they are not. So, yeah.
How can we change that?
Yeah.
Or actually, you
That's
might have
the
given
$1 million
up.
question.
Yes. You might have given up. It's your bags packed.
I think the main problem is that we do have this idea of what German is. Being German, what is it? I mean, is it somebody who has German blood? And a lot of people still think that way. And I think that we still have not come to terms with that this vision is over. It will not happen. It's gone. And the times of having a majority society with white Germans will be gone in a few years. And I think that this is also what's happening right now, that people are slowly realizing it and they cannot accept it in a way.
Because of demographics.
Yeah, because of demographics, because already the children between 1 and 5, every second child has a migration background, comes from a migration family. So in the future, we will have the majority of people living in Germany will not have pure German blood, right?
But even going back to this, I think it was kind of an illusion in the first place, right? Because the state of Germany has only been around for 153 years or something like that. And for me, one thing I noticed when I moved here, there's a lot of people who have kind of Slavic names, right?
Yes.
And there's like a weird taboo about saying, oh, you have a Slavic name. Is that like because you're from the East? And they're like, I'm German, you know? And I guess maybe before the Gastarbeiter generation, they were the ones who saw discrimination, right? Because like Germans were all over Eastern Europe. Germany was up to where Russia is now, with East Prussia. And so I wonder if they had this kind of really strong nation building process with the first empire, the Reich, and then they kind of all got brainwashed into thinking they're all just one folk, and it's just not true.
I think if you speak to them in public spaces, they would say, "Oh, I'm German. How can you say that?" But I come from a very small town in Germany, and
Where is that?
in the Siegerland. And there things were different because I not only come from a small town, I also lived in a very small village. So we were the only family with a foreign background.
Mm.
Everyone was knowing each other since centuries.
Oh, wow.
But even there, they would sometimes say, oh, but these are can I say it? The P family. In Germany, you have something called Polacken family.
Yeah.
These are, they are from there,
Right.
they come from Prussia or whatever.
Yeah.
They would say it.
Mhm.
And they would say it in a very obviously negative way.
Mm.
So there I could sense that there are still these thoughts
Even
and
among
these ideas.
the Biodeutsche.
Even among them, that it was still about who is the true German, you know?
Okay, yeah, even among kind of white Germans who've been there for hundreds of years. It's interesting, Polacken is actually just in Polish, it just means Polish. So
Yes.
I'm not taking that. I wouldn't take that as an insult, but happy for a Polish person to contradict me there. And so, you know, you grew up in this small town and you've had a career that's taken you to larger cities and, you know, you were at the Republika yesterday. Do you think that this racism is a kind of rural phenomenon much more? It's often in rural places where the AfD does well? Or it's just different in the big cities?
I think it's just different in big cities. I think in big cities, people obviously are more cosmopolitan and they do feel like they're so cosmopolitan and they're so open-minded. But at the end of the day, they live in the same system and they have done very little to change the system, right? So if I live in this system and I see what's happening around me, if I were open to seeing it and to have the self-reflection to see what was happening around me and to people around me, I would do something against it. But they choose not to, right? Because they're comfortable, they live these fancy lives, and they don't care about what's happening to people around them. So it's just different. And I have experienced that in communities where you have Germans from a working class background and migrants, they do get along much more than Germans from fancy backgrounds
Right, yeah,
and
the
migrants.
so-called Bildungsbürgertum, right? Like this educated class.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I have wondered that myself because there seems to be a kind of like elite unter sich among themselves, and they seem to. It seems like a system. I'm sure you do have this everywhere to an extent, where the elite, of course, like to have control of the system, and they can give each other jobs. You can give each other
Obviously,
good
yes.
educational opportunities. I mean, you definitely have it in the United Kingdom as well. But what I find interesting, in the United Kingdom, it works through the private school system. So you pay a lot of money, and that's how you kind of achieve this sort of elite social status. But in Germany, it's subsidized by the state. It's the gymnasium system, among other parts, right?
It's the gymnasium, and then you have political parties. So you have to have connections towards certain parties, mainly CDU and CSU. And if you have those connections, it's way easier for you to get into certain spaces, to get
Like, what
into
kinds of spaces are you talking about? This is
like
really interesting.
networking spaces, even for journalists, right? So there are certain elite journalists who are in these spaces, who are very close to politicians, which I always criticize and I don't get. I mean, if you are a proper journalist, you shouldn't be friends with politicians because it's per se, it's not okay. And you cannot be so close to them. But I see that a lot of German journalists are doing that. They're being friends with politicians. They're very close to politicians. They're trying to go into these spaces. And what happens is that they maybe unknowingly are obviously reporting more positively towards these politicians.
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a problem in political journalism more widely, right? Because if you want to know what's happening, like behind the scenes, to get a sense of it, you need to have some good contacts, right?
But don't you think that in Germany is much more that they are doing this to also, I feel like in other international journalists are not doing it to this extent, to be on the good side
well, there's
for
actually,
them.
you know what? I think you're right, because there's a term in German called Hofjournalismus,
Yes,
right? Which is
yes.
what we're describing. I do think we have this problem everywhere, to be honest. But I think in journalism, the difference is, in Germany, once you don't report tough on them, you can be friendly with them behind the scenes, and you're quite soft and friendly with them on camera as well. Whereas in the UK or Poland, or they're sometimes really tough on screen, and then behind the green room, they're very friendly, right? So they don't have this idea of sort of aggressive political journalism and reporting, right?
Totally. Yeah, I experienced that a lot. Yeah,
But you learned journalism here.
I did, yes, but I have been to Afghanistan many times, and I have seen how journalists have worked there, and it has really impressed me. And this is how I think this is how my image of journalism was really shaped. How to do journalism, I have so many people I look up to, people I work with even today. I have one colleague, and I remember seeing her on TV, how she was questioning Karzai in a press conference. Karzai, he was the former Afghan president. And she was one of the very few women. And I was so proud of it because I didn't see the same here in Germany, right? But I saw it there. And it was so impressive. Her name is Shakila. We work together now. Now she's here in Germany. So I saw women and men there who were so impressive. And that really shaped me.
And I wonder, you're right, you mentioned that she's here now. Germany, in a sense, played a really important role in this kind of foreign policy and international development NGO space, right? In a sense, a lot of countries with less than stellar human rights records complained that Germany was, lecturing them about human rights and stuff like that. But why didn't that filter on through to civil society here? Is it easier to point the finger at those people who are not so perfect in another country than to point the mirror at yourself?
I mean, did they actually lecture them? Or, was it really sustainable, or was it just to make themselves feel good? Because what I experienced, and I can only speak from my experience in Afghanistan, was that it was like a game. They would just use the same keywords here and there, human rights, women's rights, blah, 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 things like that.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, everything was just projects, and people, the activists in Afghanistan, they were just trying to get the projects so they would get money. And a lot of the money went into their own pockets. And the people from Germany, they were just trying to spend the money, the budget that they had, because they had to spend it, right? Somehow. Otherwise, they would have lost the money for the next year. So it was all just a game, like a business that was happening.
And so do you think it's a bit like the party system plays a role here? Because now I'm just thinking, yeah, you're right. You know what? There are a lot of projects by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or the CDU, or, all of them. They're actually it's actually a really well-funded civil society, right? But I don't know if I see the effect. And that's one criticism I might have of your book in the solutions section. It seems to put a lot of emphasis on, political education and civil society organizations. And I understand that's, I understand why. And it seems like a good one, but I just feel like Germany's always had quite a lot of this kind of subsidized civil society. I call it like a Scheinzivilgesellschaft, like an appearance, one of appearance. But then none of this, federal center for political education or Gesicht zeigen or anything like this actually stops the rise of the AfD, which is what it was supposed to do in a sense, right?
True. I do agree with you because I do experience the same things as you. I still think that it's important that we invest in extremism prevention, for example, because that's one thing that's happening right now. We do have initiatives. I have spoken to people who do this work, right? They go to the schools, they speak to people, they are being referred young men, young women who are interested in Islamist content, for example. And then they speak to them and they do it in a very non-judgmental way, which is great. And we need more people like that. We need people who actually do something. But those social workers, again, every year they have to fear for their funding, which is a huge problem. We should fund and invest much more in social workers and people like that who are actually on the ground, who work with people, who talk to people, and who do the good work. And I do agree with you that there are a lot of problems, but I don't think that's something that we cannot tackle, right? It's something that could be changed very easily if we could ensure that they are independent, if we could ensure that they are not, if they are sustainably funded. I think there could be a huge change.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned fighting Islamism, is that also the case with fighting right-wing extremism? Is that something that there's even much funding going into?
Obviously, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's both extremism. So both Islamism and right-wing extremism, they work in similar ways. They're very similar to each other. And there are also many studies who prove that they're very similar to each other.
What do you mean by that?
They have the same strategies and they pry on the same people. So where Islamists maybe pry more on people with a Muslim background and they try to make them feel good about themselves because the German society fails to do that. You have extremists who do the same with young people here in Germany who feel disenfranchised, who feel like they're being left out, who feel like there are things happening around them that they don't understand. So I think they work very similarly. And they have the same strategies also when it comes to social media, which is also a huge factor.
You mean like TikTok, putting that kind of positive, masculine content out there? Yes,
the same. And the algorithm really supports that. So I also experience whenever I look up content like that for research, the algorithm automatically shows me so much content, Islamist content, for me, like specifically for women, which is scary because when you look at it at the first sight, it does not look like Islamist content. Only if you know a lot about your religion, and many people don't. Many kids with Muslim background, they don't know a lot about their religion because their parents were never really religious. I have in my book I describe a case where a friend of mine came to me and he said, my kid does not want to eat with me at the same table because he calls me an infidel. And things like that are tough. So he had to put so much effort into educating his kid and to describing him. And he said, I never wanted my children to be religious, and this is what I get. Because at the end of the day, then they go to social media and there are people there who tell them you should be religious. And then they're trying to sell them their form of religion. And this is extremely, extremely dangerous.
And I guess it goes way back, actually, this phenomena whereby actually people go, they leave their country in search of a better and, more modern, more liberal life in some ways, right? Depending where they're coming from. And then they don't quite get that it's not exactly what they expected. The children experience discrimination and they want to reconnect with their roots. One way that they might do that is with, Islam or other religions as well. That could be Turkish nationalism, could be a number of things, right?
Yes, many things, because that's, I think, a very human thing to do, but it shouldn't be this way.
And I wonder, you mention that Black people and women with headscarves are two of the most discriminated against people. What do you think it is about Islam and Islamophobia that seems to, not just in Germany, but across the West, be challenging societies so much that this is the response?
I think it goes way back to when we had the Crusaders and the propaganda that was happening here in Europe. And I think we're still affected by that today, because Islam was since then seen as these uncivilized people who are, I don't know, bearded, angry men who are trying to take our women.
Or repressed women with headscarves, right?
Yes.
Who are under the control of some kind of shadowy figure. It's often like
exactly, which is obviously very Orientalist and very cliche, and it's not the reality, obviously. So it goes back to that, and we still haven't come to a point where we are self-aware enough to see that, which I think is crazy. As an educated person, it should be very easy to look at the dynamics of Islamophobia and where it comes from, to look at the media. You have so much anti-Muslim propaganda in the media. And it's just so frustrating to try to work against it, because it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, despite, you often hear positive stories as well. Like there have been some attacks recently by asylum seekers. We can't deny that. There have also been a lot of those attacks were stopped by also refugees and asylum seekers, right? So
but then why do we have to rescue people to be considered worthy, right? I think, again, it's so frustrating. Why can't we just be ourselves and just to be seen and to be seen as worthy?
Waslat Hasrat Nazimi, thank you very much.
Thank you.